The morning sun cast golden rays through the tall windows of Westminster Abbey as Prince William stood before the ancient mirror in the private preparation chamber. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the ceremonial robes that would soon make him King of England. The weight of centuries seemed to press down on his shoulders, and for a moment he closed his eyes and thought of his late mother. Princess Diana, Catherine, now Queen Catherine, entered the room quietly. She had been watching her husband from the doorway, understanding the magnitude of what this day meant to him. William had never wanted to be king this way, not after losing his father so suddenly just months before. King Charles had passed peacefully, in his sleep, but the grief still felt fresh and raw. "You look exactly as a king should," Catherine whispered, placing her hand gently on his arm. William opened his eyes and looked at his reflection again. The crimson velvet robes, trimmed with gold thread and ermine, transformed him into something more than just a husband and father. Today, he would become the symbol of a nation. Outside the Abbey, millions of people had gathered along the streets of London. Flags waved in the gentle breeze, and the excitement was almost electric. Children sat on their father's shoulders. Elderly women clutched handkerchiefs, and even the most reserved British citizens couldn't hide their emotion. This wasn't just any coronation. This was William, the people's prince, taking his rightful place. The Archbishop of Canterbury waited at the altar, holding the St. Edward's crown, the same crown that had been placed on the heads of kings and queens for nearly 400 years. The golden circlet, decorated with precious stones that caught the light from hundreds of candles, seemed to glow with its own inner fire. Television cameras from around the world focused on every detail. News anchors spoke in hushed, reverent tones as they described the scene. In living rooms across Britain, families gathered around their televisions, having prepared special meals for this historic day. In hospitals, patients propped themselves up in their beds to watch. In schools that had been given the day off, children watched with wide eyes, knowing they were witnessing history. Prince George, now a young teenager, stood with his siblings, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, in the front row of the Abbey. George understood that one day this same ceremony would happen for him. The thought both thrilled and terrified him as he watched his father prepare for the most important moment of his life. The organ began to play, its deep, rich notes filling every corner of the massive Abbey. The sound seemed to vibrate through the stone walls and into the very souls of everyone present. This was the signal. The coronation was about to begin. William took one last look at himself in the mirror, straightened his shoulders, and prepared to walk toward his destiny. As he stepped out of the preparation chamber, the full weight of the moment hit him. Every step he took brought him closer to becoming King William V, the boy who had walked behind his mother's coffin, the young man who had served in the military, the devoted husband and father. All of these parts of himself were coming together. In this one extraordinary moment, the procession began, and William walked slowly down the aisle of Westminster Abbey. With each step, he could feel the eyes of the world upon him. Some people in the congregation wiped away tears, moved by the solemnity and beauty of the ancient ceremony. Others smiled, with pride, knowing that their future king was a man of character and compassion. Behind him walked the great officers of state, carrying symbols of royal power that dated back centuries. The sword of state gleamed in the candlelight, representing justice and the protection of the realm. The orb, symbolizing the Christian world, caught the light as it was carried with reverence and ceremony. As William approached the altar, he could see familiar faces in the congregation. World leaders had traveled from every continent to witness this moment. Presidents, prime ministers, and royalty from other nations all rose to their feet as he passed. But it was the faces of ordinary British citizens, chosen by lottery to attend, that moved him most. These were his people, and soon he would pledge his life to serve them. The moment William reached the altar, profound silence fell over Westminster Abbey. Even the youngest children in the congregation seemed to understand that something sacred was happening. The Archbishop of Canterbury stepped forward, his voice clear and strong as he began the ancient words of the coronation ceremony. "Sirs, I here present unto you King William, "Your undoubted king," the archbishop announced, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. The congregation responded with, "A thunderous God save the king," that seemed to shake the very foundations of the abbey. William felt a shiver run down his spine as he heard his people accepting him as their sovereign. Outside, the crowd's response was even more dramatic. The roar of millions of voices crying, "God save the king," rolled across London like thunder. People hugged strangers, tears streaming down their faces. In Trafalgar Square, the crowd was so thick that no one could move. But everyone was united in this moment of national celebration. Back inside the abbey, William knelt before the altar. As the archbishop began the most solemn part of the ceremony, the anointing with holy oil was a tradition that stretched back over 1,000 years. As the sacred oil touched his hands, breast, and head, William felt connected to every king and queen who had come before him. His grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, too, had knelt in this same spot nearly 70 years ago. His grandfather, King George VI, had been here before her. The television cameras captured every expression that crossed William's face. Viewers around the world could see the mix of solemnity, determination, and deep emotion in his eyes. Royal commentators spoke quietly about the significance of each ritual, but many simply fell silent, allowing the power of the moment to speak for itself. Catherine watched from her place of honor, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. She remembered their wedding day in this same abbey, but this felt even more momentous. Today, her husband was becoming the head of state for 16 countries and the leader of the Commonwealth. The weight of responsibility was enormous. But she had complete faith in his ability to serve with wisdom and compassion. The crown jewels waited on a cushion beside the altar, each piece representing different aspects of royal power. The scepter, with the cross, contained the largest cut diamond in the world, the Great Star of Africa. The orb topped with a cross symbolized the Christian faith that underpinned the monarchy, and the imperial state crown, which William would wear as he left the abbey, contained over 2,800 diamonds and some of the most famous gems in history. But it was St. Edward's crown that held the most significance. This was the crown used only for coronations, heavy with gold and symbolic meaning. As the archbishop lifted it high above William's head, the entire abbey held its breath. This was the moment that would transform Prince William into King William V. The crown descended slowly, and as it settled on William's head, something magical seemed to happen. The man who had entered the abbey as a prince was now, officially and completely, the king. The transformation was visible to everyone watching. His posture straightened even more. His expression became more regal, and an aura of majesty seemed to surround him. The congregation erupted once again with "God Save the King." But this time it was different. This time, they were acclaiming not a prince, but their crowned and anointed monarch. The sound rolled through the abbey and out into the streets, where millions of people took up the cry. In that moment, something extraordinary happened that no one had expected. As William rose from his knees, now wearing the crown of his ancestors, a single ray of sunlight broke through the clouds outside and streamed through one of the abbey's ancient stained glass windows. The light fell directly on the new king, illuminating him like a divine blessing. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. Photographers captured the moment, and the image would become one of the most famous photographs in royal history. William, caught in that beam of golden light, looked every inch the king that Britain needed, strong, compassionate, and blessed. With a quiet dignity that spoke to hearts around the world, even the archbishop paused for a moment, clearly moved by the power of the scene. When he continued with the ceremony, his voice carried an extra note of reverence. This was clearly a moment that would be remembered for generations to come, a sign that this coronation was truly blessed. As the coronation ceremony continued, King William's children watched their father with a mixture of pride and wonder. Princess Charlotte, now a poised young lady, understood more than her younger brothers about what this day meant for their family. She saw how the crown seemed to transform her father, and she felt a surge of pride, knowing that this remarkable man was her dad. Prince Louis, still young, but old enough to grasp the importance of the day, sat perfectly still throughout the ceremony. He had been coached for weeks about royal protocol, but his natural good behavior and the solemnity of the occasion kept him focused. When he saw his father crowned, his face broke into a wide smile that melted hearts around the world. Prince George, as the heir to the throne, felt the weight of the moment differently than his siblings. Watching his father become king meant that he was now officially the next in line. The realization was both thrilling and daunting. He studied every detail of the ceremony, knowing that one day he would experience this same transformation. The congregation included representatives from every walk of British life. There were teachers and nurses, firefighters and farmers, scientists and artists, which had been chosen to represent the diverse nation that William would now lead. Many wiped away tears as they watched their new king, feeling a personal connection. To this man, who had always shown genuine interest in ordinary people's lives, among the international guests, there was a palpable sense of respect for the new monarch. World leaders who had worked with William during his years as heir apparent knew his character and abilities. They had seen his dedication to causes like mental health awareness and environmental protection. Many felt optimistic about working with King William V on global challenges. The Archbishop continued with the traditional prayers and blessings, each word carrying the weight of centuries of tradition. When he spoke of the king's duty to serve his people with justice and mercy, William's expression showed his deep understanding of these responsibilities. This was not just pageantry. It was a sacred commitment being made before God and the nation. Television audiences around the world watched in fascination as ancient traditions unfolded before their eyes. In countries where William would serve as head of state, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and others, people gathered in community centers and public squares to watch the ceremony together. The emotional connection to their new king was evident on faces from Sydney to Toronto. Back in the Abbey, the moment arrived for the homage to be paid to the new king. The Archbishop was the first to kneel before William, pledging loyalty on behalf of the Church of England. His words were simple but powerful. "I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to your majesty, and to your heirs and successors according to law, so help me God." But it was when Catherine approached the throne that the most emotional moment of the ceremony occurred. As queen consort, she was not required to pay homage in the traditional way, but she had requested to do something special. Instead of the formal words used by others, she spoke from her heart. "My beloved husband," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed abbey, "I pledge not only my loyalty as your queen, but my love as your wife, and my support as your partner in service to our people." The personal nature of her words, combined with the formal setting, created a moment of intimate connection that touched everyone present. William's composure, which had remained steady throughout the ceremony, finally cracked slightly. A single tear rolled down his cheek as he looked at the woman who had stood by his side through every challenge and triumph. Their love story had captivated the world, and this moment reminded everyone that beneath the crown and ceremony, they were still a husband and wife deeply devoted to each other. The cameras captured this tender moment, and it became the image that defined the coronation for many people. Here was their new king, strong and dignified, but also human and capable of deep emotion. It was exactly the kind of authentic moment that made William so beloved by his people. As Catherine took her place beside the throne, wearing her own magnificent crown, the couple looked out over the congregation together. They were no longer just the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge or even the Prince and Princess of Wales. They were King William V and Queen Catherine, ready to lead Britain into a new era. The final hymns of the ceremony began, and the abbey filled. With voices raised in celebration and prayer, the music seemed to lift everyone's spirits higher, creating an atmosphere of joy and hope that would be remembered by all who were present on this extraordinary day. As the coronation ceremony reached its conclusion, King William prepared for one of the most meaningful moments of the entire day. His first speech as the crowned monarch. The ancient ritual had been completed, but now came the moment when he would speak directly to his people in his own words, not those prescribed by tradition. The abbey fell completely silent as William rose from the throne. He had spent weeks crafting this speech, but in this moment, he felt compelled to speak from his heart rather than simply recite prepared remarks. The weight of the crown on his head reminded him of the promises he had just made, and he wanted his first words as king to reflect the sincerity of his commitment. "My people," he began, his voice strong and clear,
"I caring
to every corner of the Abbey and to millions watching around the world. Today, I have been crowned your king, but I have been your servant for many years already, and I will continue to serve you for all the days of my life." The simplicity and honesty of his words immediately connected with his audience. This was not the flowery language of traditional royal speeches, but the direct, genuine communication style that had made William so popular throughout his years of public service. "I think of my father, King Charles, who taught me that kingship is not about power, but about service. I think of my grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, who showed me that duty and love for one's people must come before personal desires. And I think of my mother, Princess Diana, who taught me that a royal's greatest strength comes from understanding and caring for those who struggle." At the mention of Diana, many people in the congregation began to cry openly. William's mother had been gone for so many years, but her influence on her son was evident in every word he spoke. The empty chair that had been placed in the Abbey, in her memory, seemed somehow less empty as William honored her legacy. "But most of all," William continued, "I think of all of you, the teachers who shape young minds, the doctors and nurses who heal the sick, the farmers who feed us, the workers who build our communities, the parents who raise the next generation, with love and hope. You are the true strength of our nation, and I am honored to serve as your king." The response from the crowd outside was immediate and overwhelming. The roar of approval could be heard even inside the thick walls of the Abbey. People were not just cheering for their new king, they were cheering because they felt truly seen and valued by him. Inside the Abbey, world leaders nodded approvingly. This was the kind of leadership the world needed: humble, service-oriented, and focused on bringing people together rather than dividing them. Several presidents and prime ministers made mental notes to share William's words with their own citizens. The new king continued his speech, outlining his vision for the future. He spoke about climate change and the need for urgent action to protect the planet for future generations. He talked about mental health and the importance of caring for people's emotional well-being as much as their physical health. He addressed the challenges facing young people and promised that their voices would be heard in his reign. "I cannot promise that the road ahead will be easy," William said, his voice growing more passionate. "We face challenges that no previous generation has had to confront, but I can promise that we will face them together. As one nation united in our commitment to building a better world for our children and grandchildren." Catherine watched her husband with obvious pride. She had heard him practice parts of this speech, but seeing him deliver it with such conviction and authenticity made her fall in love with him all over again. This was the man she had married, someone who truly cared about making a positive difference in the world. The children in the congregation were particularly captivated by their new king's words. Unlike many royal speeches that went over their heads, William spoke in a way that even young people could understand and connect with. And he would later say that this speech inspired them to think about how they could serve their communities. As William concluded his remarks, he made one final, unexpected gesture. Instead of simply returning to his throne, he stepped down from the altar and walked among the congregation, stopping to speak briefly with ordinary citizens who had been chosen to attend. This break from protocol surprised his security team, but it perfectly captured the kind of King William intended to be, one who was close to his people, not distant from them. An elderly woman who had served as a nurse for 50 years found herself face to face with the newly crowned king. "Thank you for your service," William said simply, taking her hand. The woman was so overcome with emotion that she could barely speak, but her tears said everything. This was her king, and she knew he truly cared about people like her. The cameras captured every moment of these interactions, and the images would become some of the most beloved from the entire coronation. Here was a king who was already showing that he would reign differently, with humility, accessibility, and genuine love for his people. The procession from Westminster Abbey to Buckingham Palace was unlike anything London had ever seen. King William and Queen Catherine rode in the Golden State Coach. It's the same magnificent carriage that had carried monarchs for over 250 years. The coach, weighing for tons and pulled by 8 Windsor gray horses, moved slowly through streets lined with millions of cheering people. What made this procession special was not just the pageantry, but the genuine emotion displayed by the crowds. People of all ages waved flags, threw flower petals, and called out personal messages to their new king and queen. Many held signs with photos of Princess Diana, showing how they connected William's coronation to his mother's legacy of compassion. In service, inside the coach, William and Catherine were overwhelmed by the warmth of the reception. They had expected crowds, but nothing had prepared them for the sheer love and enthusiasm they saw on every face. Children held up handmade drawings, elderly people saluted with pride, and families shared this historic moment together. "Look at them," Catherine whispered to her husband, gesturing toward a group of young people who had painted their faces with the Union Jack. "They're so full of hope and joy. It's beautiful." William nodded, feeling the enormous responsibility of living up to their expectations. But he also felt energized by their support. These were his people, then their faith in him would give him strength in the challenging times ahead. The military procession that accompanied the coach was spectacular in its precision and grandeur. The household cavalry in their gleaming breastplates and plumed helmets rode with perfect synchronization. The guards' regiments marched with the precise timing that had made them famous around the world, but even the soldiers seemed affected by the emotional atmosphere, many showing rare smiles as they acknowledged the cheering crowds. Along the route, there were several spontaneous moments that would become legendary. When the procession paused, briefly, due to the sheer size of the crowds, a group of children began singing the national anthem. Their sweet voices carried over the noise of the crowd, and soon thousands of people joined in. The sound of "God Save the King" being sung by so many voices created a spine-tingling moment that brought tears to many eyes. At one point, an elderly veteran in a wheelchair managed to get close to the coach. William noticed him immediately and instructed the coachman to stop. The king leaned out of the coach window and spoke with the man who had served in the Royal Navy for 30 years. The veteran saluted his new king with a shaking hand, and William saluted back with obvious respect and gratitude. "Thank you for your service, sir," William said clearly, his words carrying 2 nearby crowd members who then shared what they had witnessed. Within minutes, the story spread through social media, showing the world once again the kind of king William would be. The international media covering the event were struck by the genuine nature of the celebrations. Unlike some royal events that felt formal and distant, this coronation had created a real connection between the monarchy and the people. Commentators struggled to find words to describe the emotional power of what they were witnessing. As the procession neared Buckingham Palace, the crowds grew even thicker. The mall was completely packed with people who had been waiting for hours, just to catch a glimpse of their new king and queen. Many had traveled from across the Commonwealth nations to be present for this historic day. The palace itself had been decorated magnificently for the occasion. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from every window, and the royal standard flew proudly from the flagpole. The gates were adorned with golden decorations that caught the afternoon sunlight and seemed to glow with their own inner light. When the Golden State Coach finally arrived at the palace, the roar from the crowd was deafening. People pressed against the barriers, hoping to get one last close look at their new sovereigns. William and Catherine stepped down from the coach with grace and dignity, but also with obvious joy at the warmth of their reception. Before entering the palace, both the king and queen turned back to wave at the crowds one more time. This simple gesture triggered another massive cheer that seemed to roll across London like a wave. It was clear that something special had happened on this day. A bond had been forged between the new monarch and his people that would define his reign. As they walked up the steps to the palace, Catherine took William's hand for just a moment. It was a small, human gesture in the midst of all the ceremony and protocol, but it perfectly captured the love and partnership that would be at the heart of their reign together. They were not just king and queen, They were husband and wife, facing the future as a team. The palace doors closed behind them. But the celebration in the streets continued. People lingered, reluctant to leave this magical day behind. Many would later say that they had witnessed something truly special, not just a coronation, but the beginning of a new chapter in British history that promised to be filled with hope, compassion, and genuine service to others. As evening fell over London, King William stood on the famous balcony of Buckingham Palace, looking out over the thousands of people still gathered in the courtyard below. The crowds had not diminished despite the late hour. If anything, they seemed to have grown larger as people continued to arrive, drawn by the historic significance of the day. The balcony appearance was a tradition dating back generations, but this one felt different. When William stepped out, still wearing his coronation robes and crown, the cheer that went up was so loud it could be heard miles away. But what happened next would become the defining moment of his coronation. Instead of the traditional wave and quick retreat inside, William did something unexpected. He stepped forward to the edge of the balcony and began to speak, his voice carrying clearly through the powerful sound system that had been set up for the occasion. "My dear friends," he began, and the crowd gradually quieted to hear their new king's words. "I want to thank you for giving me the greatest gift a king could receive, your love, your trust, and your support. Today has been overwhelming in the most beautiful way possible." People in the crowd began to cry again, moved by the sincerity in his voice. This was not a formal speech, but a heartfelt conversation between a king and his people. How parents lifted children onto their shoulders so they could see and remember this moment for the rest of their lives. "But I want you to know," William continued, "that this crown I wear belongs not to me, but to all of us. It represents our shared values, our common hopes, and our determination to build a better future together. I am simply the guardian of these ideals, and I promise to guard them with my life." The response was immediate and emotional. People began calling out, "We love you, William," and "God save the king," but also more personal messages. "Thank you for caring about us," shouted one woman. "We believe in you," called out a young man. Catherine joined her husband on the balcony, along with their 3 children. The sight of the royal family together, framed against the illuminated palace, created a picture that would be remembered forever. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis waved enthusiastically at the crowd, their youthful energy adding to the joyful atmosphere. But it was when William lifted his youngest son, Prince Louis, onto his shoulders that the moment became truly magical. The little prince, delighted by the sea of faces and the thunderous cheering, began to wave with both hands, his face split by an enormous grin. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. Here was their future, represented by this happy, confident child. "Look at our future king," someone shouted from the crowd, and suddenly everyone was cheering for Prince Louis as much as for his father. The little boy seemed to understand that something wonderful was happening, and his obvious joy was infectious. Princess Charlotte, ever poised, curtsied beautifully to the crowd, earning another massive cheer. Prince George, now fully understanding his position as heir to the throne, stood tall and dignified beside his father, occasionally breaking into a smile that reminded everyone he was still a teenager, despite his formal role. As the family prepared to go back inside, William made one final gesture that would be talked about for years to come. He removed his crown and held it high above his head, showing it to the crowd. The symbolism was clear. This crown belonged to the people, and he was holding it in trust for them. The cheer that followed seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. It was a sound of pure joy, hope, and love that rose up from the thousands of hearts gathered below. In that moment, everyone present, whether in the courtyard, watching on television, or following online, felt connected to something larger than themselves. Inside the palace, as the royal family finally retreated from the balcony, William felt overwhelmed by the emotions of the day. The crown that had felt so heavy that morning now seemed lighter, supported by the love and trust of his people. He had begun the day as a prince who would be king, and he was ending it as a king who truly belonged to his people, Catherine found. Her husband sitting quietly in one of the palace's private rooms, still wearing his coronation robes, but with the crown now resting on a nearby table. "How are you feeling?" she asked, sitting beside him and taking his hand. "Grateful," William replied simply, and humbled, and more determined than ever to be worthy of what happened out there today. Through the windows, they could still hear the sounds of celebration from the streets below. People were singing, laughing, and sharing in the joy of this historic day. Street parties had spontaneously erupted throughout London and across the Commonwealth. As people came together to celebrate their new king, the coronation of King William V had been more than just a ceremony. It had been a moment of national unity and hope that would be remembered as a turning point in British history. It had shown the world that the monarchy could still inspire and unite people in an age of division and uncertainty. As the new king finally prepared for bed, removing the ceremonial robes that had transformed him, he knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities. But he also knew that he would face them with the love and support of his people. That knowledge gave him strength for whatever lay ahead. The coronation was over, but the reign of King William V had truly begun.